It is 12:14 in the morning on September 26, 1983. In a bunker buried in the hills south of Moscow, a facility so secret that it does not appear on any Soviet map, staffed by officers who are not permitted to tell their families where they work, an alarm begins to sound. The alarm is not a drill. On the main display screen, a single word appears in Cyrillic script. The word means launch. The Soviet early warning satellite network has detected the heat signature of a ballistic missile launched from the continental United States. One missile. Then, within seconds, four more. 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles, the system reports, are in the air and heading toward the Soviet Union. The duty officer stares at the screen. His name is Stanislav Petrov. He is 44 years old. He is not supposed to be here tonight. He is covering for a colleague. His job in this moment is clear. Protocol is unambiguous. A confirmed launch detection must be reported immediately to the Soviet Military High Command, which will report to the General Staff, which will report to the leadership, which will initiate a retaliatory nuclear strike before the incoming missiles can destroy the Soviet Union's ability to respond. He has approximately 5 minutes. He picks up the telephone, and then he stops. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 is the moment that most people point to when they think about how close the world has come to nuclear war. 13 days of visible, documented, publicly acknowledged crisis, Kennedy and Khrushchev, naval blockades, the world holding its breath. It has been written about, filmed, analyzed, and taught in schools for 60 years. September 26, 1983 is almost unknown. No one held their breath because no one knew. The decision that prevented nuclear war that night was made by one man, alone, in a bunker, in the dark, in approximately 5 minutes. It was not the result of diplomacy or negotiation or the careful management of international tensions. It was the result of a gut feeling, a logical inference, and a willingness to deviate from protocol at the exact moment when protocol would have ended the world. Stanislav Petrov made the right call. He was reprimanded for it. And then the world moved on, never knowing what had almost happened or who had stopped it. To understand the night of September 26th, you have to understand the particular madness of the nuclear standoff that produced it. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction rested on a single foundational logic, that neither side would launch a nuclear first strike if it knew the other side could absorb the attack and retaliate with enough force to destroy the attacker anyway. The deterrent was not the weapons themselves. It was the certainty of the response. This logic required the ability to detect an incoming attack with enough warning time to launch a retaliatory strike before the incoming missiles destroyed the silos and submarines and command infrastructure that made retaliation possible. Minutes mattered. Seconds mattered. The entire strategic architecture of nuclear deterrence depended on early warning systems that could detect a launch, assess it, and transmit the information to decision makers in time for them to act. The Soviet early warning satellite network, the system that Stanislav Petrov was monitoring on the night of September 26th, was called OKO. It had been operational for less than 2 years. It was, by the standards of the time, sophisticated. It was also, by the standards of what was being asked of it, deeply imperfect. Petrov knew this. He had been involved in the development of the system. He understood its technical architecture, its detection methodology, and its failure modes. The year 1983 was one of the most dangerous of the entire Cold War. In March, President Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire and announced the Strategic Defense Initiative. In September, a Soviet interceptor had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 7, killing all 269 people aboard. The Soviet military leadership was genuinely afraid, not of losing a war, but of being surprised. The fear of surprise attack had become something close to an institutional obsession, shaping the hair-trigger posture of the early warning system that Stanislav Petrov was monitoring on the night of September 26th. He had come on duty at 6 in the evening. By midnight, the shift had been quiet. At 12:14 a.m., the alarm sounded. Petrov's first reaction, by his own later account, was not panic, it was suspicion. The system was showing one missile launch, then 4 more, 5 in total. The display read, "High reliability." But something did not feel right. Petrov would later struggle to articulate exactly what it was. A combination of factors, none of them individually conclusive, that together produced a certainty he could not fully justify in the moment but could not ignore. First, the number, 5 missiles. If the United States was launching a nuclear first strike, why 5? A genuine first strike would involve hundreds of missiles, fired simultaneously, designed to overwhelm Soviet defenses and destroy retaliatory capacity before it could be used. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. 5 missiles, launched in sequence, with the satellite detecting them one by one, looked less like a coordinated attack than like a sensor anomaly. Second, the ground radar. Soviet doctrine required that satellite detection be confirmed by ground-based radar before a launch report was escalated to the high command. The ground radar had not yet confirmed anything. The absence of confirmation nagged at him. Third, the system itself. Petrov knew the OKO satellites. He knew their failure modes. He knew that the conditions on the night of September 26th, a specific configuration of sunlight reflected from high-altitude clouds, were precisely the conditions that his technical training told him could produce false positives. None of this was proof. The system said, launch. The system said, high reliability. Petrov was a lieutenant colonel, not a general. His job was not to second-guess the system. His job was to report. The phone in his hand connected to the duty general of the Soviet Air Defense Forces. If he reported a launch, the general would report to the high command. The high command would report to the general staff. The general staff would report to the leadership. And the leadership would have approximately 10 minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory strike. Petrov made his decision. He reported a false alarm. He told the duty general that the system had malfunctioned, that the launch detection was not genuine, that the United States had not fired nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. He had no proof. He had a feeling, a logic, and a willingness to be wrong in the most consequential way imaginable. The minutes that followed were the longest of Stanislav Petrov's life. He sat at his console and waited. If he was wrong, if the missiles were real, the first detonations over Soviet territory would occur within minutes. He waited. The minutes passed. No detonations. No ground radar confirmation. No secondary alerts. The alarm had been a false positive caused, as subsequent investigation would confirm, by a rare alignment of sunlight reflected from high-altitude clouds that had fooled the satellite's infrared sensors into reading a launch signature that did not exist. He had been right. But being right, in the Soviet military system of 1983, was not necessarily a protection. The incident triggered an internal investigation. The investigation established that the system had malfunctioned, and that Petrov's assessment had been correct. It also established that Petrov had violated protocol, that he had made a unilateral decision that, by the rules he operated under, he was not authorized to make. He had acted on instinct rather than procedure. And he had, in doing so, exposed the entire Soviet early warning system to a scrutiny that the military found deeply uncomfortable. Petrov was not decorated, he was not celebrated, he was not promoted. He received a reprimand. The official Soviet position was that the incident had been handled correctly by the system. Acknowledging that a single officer's intuition had overridden a computer assessment and prevented a potential nuclear launch was not a story the Soviet military wanted told. It raised too many uncomfortable questions about the reliability of the system and the terrifying fragility of the machinery that was supposed to keep the world safe. Petrov was quietly transferred to a less sensitive posting. Within a few years, he had retired from the military. He moved to a small apartment in Fryazevo, a town outside Moscow, where he lived alone after his wife died of cancer. The world did not know what had happened. The Soviet Union did not tell anyone. The incident was classified. In 1998, Petrov was contacted by a researcher who had found references to the incident in declassified Soviet archives. His story became public for the first time, 15 years after the night had happened. He was living in his small apartment. He was having difficulty paying his utility bills. The international recognition that followed was genuine, if belated and somewhat surreal. In 2004, Petrov traveled to the United Nations headquarters in New York, where he was presented with a World Citizen Award. In 2006, he received the Dresden Peace Prize. In 2013, he was the subject of a documentary film called The Man Who Saved the World, which showed him visiting the United States for the first time, being embraced by Kevin Costner at a Hollywood event organized in his honor, and sitting quietly through speeches that described him as one of the most important human beings of the 20th century. He seemed, throughout all of it, slightly bewildered. He had never entirely accepted the framing of himself as a hero. In interviews, he returned repeatedly to the same qualification. He had done what seemed right in the moment. He was not sure it had been a decision in the way the word implied. It had been more like a refusal to report something he did not believe. He also said more than once that he had been lucky, that if the system had shown 10 missiles instead of 5, or if the ground radar had produced a spurious confirmation, or if he had been a different kind of officer, more rule-bound, less technically skeptical, the outcome might have been different. He was not wrong about that. The Russian government never officially recognized Petrov's role in the incident. There was no state honor, no official apology for the reprimand, no acknowledgement that the man who had deviated from protocol on the night of September 26th had possibly saved the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017, in his apartment in Fryazevo. He was 77 years old. His death was not reported publicly for several months, discovered only when a German filmmaker who had stayed in contact with him tried to reach him and received no answer. The nuclear early warning systems are still running. American, Russian, Chinese, the satellites still orbit, the sensors still scan, the computers still assess and classify and report. The protocols are still in place. And somewhere in a bunker or a command center or a monitoring facility whose location is classified, there is a duty officer sitting at a console, watching a screen, waiting for an alarm that will give them 5 minutes to decide. The question that Stanislav Petrov's story leaves us with is not whether the systems are more reliable now than they were in 1983. They probably are. The question is whether reliability is the variable that matters most. Because the failure on the night of September 26th was not a failure of technology. The satellite worked exactly as designed. The system detected an infrared signature and classified it as a missile launch and reported it with high confidence, exactly as it was built to do. The failure was in the gap between what the system could measure and what it could understand, between the data it could collect and the judgment it could not provide. That gap was filled on September 26, 1983, by one man, sitting alone in a bunker, holding a telephone, deciding in 5 minutes without proof on the basis of nothing more than experience and instinct and a refusal to believe what the screen was telling him, that the world was not ending tonight. He was right. We are here because he was right.